Hi friends, you're listening to the Leading the Early Years for the Future podcast with me, Dr. Amie Fabry, and I am so delighted today to introduce a very special guest who is an early childhood teacher, a consultant and a mum who describes herself as a forever learner. Sarah Louise Gandolfo has a career that spans over 20 years in the early years sector. She has worked in a variety of roles and she has studied early childhood education, leadership and research. She's also very committed to making the world a better place for children by tapping into love and kindness. How beautiful is that? Thank you so much for the work that you do, Sarah Louise, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Amie. What a lovely introduction. I'm so pleased to be here.
Me too. Can't wait to dive into this conversation about your amazing work. But before we do that, I'd really love to know, do you have a hidden talent? You know, as human beings, we're very multi-dimensional and we love the work we do and we do it with enthusiasm and passion, but sometimes there's more to us than just our work. So is there something that is a hidden talent, maybe something people don't know about you, even just an interest or something that lights you up and brings you joy outside of the work you do?
Look, there is. I have been a bit of a crochet fan since I was 6 years old. And when I tell people that, I get looks, very strange looks from people. But yeah, my grandma taught me to crochet when I was 6. And for a long time, it wasn't really cool at school. So I didn't, do anything with it. But it's certainly been something that as an adult I've picked up and been able to run with again to kind of ground me and to bring me a little bit of peace in what is a very busy life.
That is so cool. And I have to say, I'm slightly envious. When I was a kid, my grandma taught me how to knit and I could never cast on or cast off. And I used to drop stitches and have holes. But I loved knitting, but I could never for the life of me figure out how to crochet. My sister could do it and I just couldn't do it. And I was always just like, that's just that thing that I can't seem to master. So go you. I think that's brilliant. Let's dive into early years. You've got quite diverse experience. You've been in the sector for a long time. You also have worn lots of different professional hats, but also mum hat. Why do you believe the early years are so important?
It's funny because I came into early years accidentally. It was something that I kind of just fell into in high school. I needed a bit of a school holiday job. I needed something to do when I had those free periods that you get in year 11 and 12. And a friend's mum from church kind of said, why don't you come along and work at the service that I'm running? And so it wasn't really on the cards. It wasn't something I planned. I wanted to work with high school students. I wanted to be an art teacher or psychology or something that was certainly not, working with young children. But what's kind of happened is even though it didn't start, I guess, with intention, the way it's grown is that I can't not see the importance of early years anymore. Like everything I look at, when I look at, politicians and the way government functions, and I just go, actually, this is all about your early childhood experience. When I look at my own children, the way they're moving through school, I'm like, actually, it was your early childhood experience that has allowed you to be in this space successfully. And so I think, when I think about early childhood, what I'm thinking about is that, we can't extrapolate it from any other time period in someone's life. We can't extrapolate it from any other type of work or being or just doing in life. Like early childhood is everything. And I'm probably not answering your question very eloquently, but I'm so passionate about the early years because I can see that inherent value that moves from literally not even from the moment the child's born, but before that. And then as they move off into the world.
I love that response because I think I think largely if we look at society broadly, I don't think that we very well understand the importance of the early years. I think those of us who work in the sector do, but beyond that, I still think it's an unknown space for a lot of people. And even with an education lens on, like a lot of the work that I do is with schools, and I know a lot of educators and very well-meaning educators and leaders just don't understand why the early years is so important. And I think one of the greatest misconceptions there is that we look at the early years and think it's just about preparing children for, the academic learning that we want to see happen in, mid to late primary school into secondary. And it becomes about how do we prepare them for good ATAR scores and things like that. So I actually love that you're talking about the early years is actually impacting who we become as human beings. And that has such a richer, deeper, more profound role to play. And I think that's the conversation that we actually need to also be having is not just how do we help children to be academically successful, but how do we actually nurture them in those early years so that they grow up to be the kinds of human beings and citizens that we actually want in our communities.
Absolutely. I teach comparative education and global perspectives at Melbourne Polytechnic. And one of the things that I love about teaching in that environment with these pre-service teachers who come from, countries from all over the world, countries I've never even heard of, I ask them to share about their experiences of early childhood. And obviously I'm doing that from a lens of thinking about what are global perspectives, what are the curriculums, what are the laws and things. So we're looking at it from that lens. But one of the really magical things that's happened through those conversations is that little light bulb moment when people realize, these young people are realizing that all those experiences have shaped who they are now. And suddenly they're making a connection between that importance of the early years and then what they're doing at this very moment, sitting at a desk, having a yarn with a group of us. It's such a profound experience. And I think the more as adults we can consider that role and think about our early childhood experiences. Where did you go to kinder? Were you in long day care? What was that like for you? You might not remember, but talking to your old people, that might be an opportunity to open up some dialogue and have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, gosh, there's so many tangents we could take that, right? Like, just even that kind of inner emotional regulation, connecting to who we are as individuals, our own identities. And, you talk to so many adults and I talk to a lot of educators, but also leaders, as I know you do. And there's so many of those inner dialogues, and some of us carry shame and guilt around things, different perspectives we have about our own abilities and our own identity that is impacting the way we show up, from the way we see ourselves and the work we do, or the way we engage with other people, whether they are professional relationships or personal relationships. Like, it's really huge, when you start to scratch the surface. There's just so much in there, right? Gosh, we could spend hours talking about that. But I really want to dive into your work. Tell us about the work you do. You mentioned you work at Melbourne Polytechnic, but I know you also work as a consultant. So tell us a bit about the work that you do and why you do what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So the tertiary space, I mean, much like falling into early childhood, an opportunity presented itself where a dear friend of mine was lecturing at Melbourne Polytechnic and they needed some more sessional people. So I thought, you know what, I'll give it a go, because that's my vibe in life, is just give it a go and see what happens. So I'm now at the end of my second year and I absolutely love it. It's such a wonderful team, such a wonderful environment for the students. And I mean, I'm learning so much with them, which is just so wonderful. But yes, the other hat that I wear is as a consultant for Sarah Louise Consultancy, which started during the pandemic. It was originally called Learning to Lead in Early Childhood. And it started with just a Facebook page and a want to bring people together. It was a space where I could share my learnings. I was doing a Master's of Educational Leadership at the time, and I needed a place to put articles and to put quotes. And, if there was a funny meme about leadership or something, I just wanted a place where I could just dump all this that I knew other people had just free access to it. And I'm certainly not a tech whiz, so I couldn't do any kind of website or anything like that. So Facebook it was. Mm-hmm. And that grew in popularity. And I ran a beautiful series called Leaders in Lockdown, where I interviewed leaders from around Victoria about their struggles and their challenges, but also their successes that they were going through during the extended lockdowns here in Melbourne. And I think it just kind of grew from that. And people started to reach out and ask for support and ask for advice. And there was never really a plan, I guess, to become a consultant and to work in that kind of space. I love what I do, and I'm so excited that I get to do it. But I never thought that that would be the path that I'd be on. But now, given that, the sector has changed a lot post-pandemic in Victoria in particular, but we know around Australia as well and beyond, of course. But what I do now is a lot of work around access and inclusion for children with disabilities and neurodiversities, and also thinking about leadership capacity and leadership building. So there was a bit of a rebrand this year to Sarah Louise Consultancy, so kind of taking that focus specifically off leadership. While leadership is my first love and will always be the thing that I love to do, It's not everyone's cup of tea. And I think that's helped to make things a little bit more accessible for people as well. So at the moment, yeah, it's just me. And I sit behind my computer. We're doing a lot of Zooms. I go out and visit services, a lot of coaching and mentoring in the moment. So with children, helping to work through some of the challenges, particularly around behavior, because it's one thing to kind of tell me over a computer screen. It's a very another thing when I'm seeing the shelf climbing and, dive bombing into a group of children in action, very different advice that I can give. So it's been a really nice way, I think, for me to consider the experiences that I've had and where I've come from. I've been very fortunate in my career to work for some pretty amazing places, to have a lot of professional learning myself, to be able to engage in a lot of really robust conversations. And of course, very privileged to have been in the higher education space as well to get more qualifications. But yeah, I feel so privileged to be able to share that back with people. And while my work is very service focused, a part of me does feel like, this is my purpose to be here. It's to make sure that our sector can flourish into the future. It's to make sure people feel supported, maybe when their workplace is not feeling as supportive as they would like to, but we can work on that. We can help to shift that. We can talk about our values and how we use strengths in the workplace, and we can start to shift some of that narrative. So yes, in a roundabout way, that's what I do. But again, I just love what I do, and I love working with people and seeing people light up when they have those moments of going, actually, I do know what I'm doing. Actually, I am an amazing early childhood professional, and I can do something really incredible here.
Wow, that's amazing. What a great story. I really love hearing about why people get into the work they do. And, it's so clear, so evident to hear the passion that you have and the purpose that drives you to do what you do. I don't know if this is going to be easy to talk about, because people, I find, are not always good at saying, this is what I do really well. But, I can read between the lines, you're having an impact on the sector, and you're doing this work for a very good reason, to support our sector and support our educators. Can you dive a little deeper into, what is the impact that you're perhaps seeing or hearing from educators that you are mentoring and coaching and working with?
You're right. That is really hard to say. I've started posting little testimonials and feedback on my socials. And every time I post, I'm like, oh, dear God, here I go again, big noting myself.
No.
I think one of the greatest things that I've noticed to come from my style of coaching and mentoring, because it is my style, it's not the only way to engage in coaching and mentoring, so it won't be for everyone, and I know that. But one of the things that I've really noticed is that when people start with me, their body language, and usually we start online, just demographically, and it's an easy and accessible way. But body language is very hunched over. Everyone's really in themselves, looking defeated, feeling deflated. And there's a very, I don't want to say negative rhetoric around what they do, but they're at a point where they're just like, I don't know what to do anymore. And so I come in, we do one-on-one, we might do some small groups, I might come into the classroom, support you in that way, whatever you need. And what I find is that by the end session, and I mean, it doesn't really take long, because it's one person fully, wholeheartedly believing in you. And actually, when you've got that person, it happens really rapidly. And so what I see after about 4 or 5 sessions is suddenly you're coming to the meeting, you're sitting up a little bit straighter, your hair might be done a little bit nicer that day. You're smiling and you're excited to tell me about the amazing things that are happening. So it's almost, it's not tangible. There's no, like awards, like people aren't winning awards, and they're not, I can't really comment on whether they're getting exceeding because of that or not. But to know that there's, that shift in desire to work in the sector, that shift in feeling capable, that you do know what you're doing, that for me is what I do. That's what I want to help people do. And that, that fits in, like I said, with my style of coaching and mentoring. And for me, I was very fortunate to have a mentor that fully, wholeheartedly believed in me, gave me a little boost and a little leg up, and let me run with it and kind of sent me out into the world. That's what I want to do for other people too. We're not all fortunate to just find that person randomly and have the confidence to walk up to them and say, hey, let's talk, let's have a lunch together. But, I can be that person, even if it's on email, even if, one of my clients was only ever over the phone, To this day, I don't know what she looks like because she only wanted to talk over the phone. But even that tone in her voice, that first day, she was so defeated. 2 months later, she was telling me about the change that she saw in her children, in her space. And I hadn't been in the space. It was all her. It was all her and how she was feeling about herself. So that's what I do.
Beautiful. What incredible work you do. And I can't help but reflect on, I guess, the relationship between what you're doing for educators and what educators do for our children, but just to be present, to give people space to feel seen and heard, but also to remind them that they're capable. I think we're also good at being critical of ourselves, and particularly when you face a lot of challenges. And for our educators, we know they're doing it really tough. There's, a lot of burnout and increasing demands in terms of work and time and stress. So, to have someone like you in your corner that you can talk to and, encourage, and I'm sure you provide strategies and things to support them as well, but just to be heard and seen and validated and encouraged, that's just so remarkable. And then to see, for these educators to come back and say that that's having an impact on, I guess, how they're showing up in the classroom and with the children, and that it's impacting the children. That's really, really profound. Such important work. This sounds amazing, and it is amazing. But do you face any challenges doing this work, or have you faced any challenges going from, working as an educator into this consulting role? Have you faced any challenges as a leader? And if so, how do you navigate those?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest challenges is that people are so burnt out. And I don't use the word burnout very lightly because I did go through a period of being in medically diagnosed burnout. And so when I come across people and I'm seeing these warning signs, I'm seeing that, it's kind of beyond defeat. They're complacent. They're showing up for work because they have to, because there's bills to pay, but there's nothing, there's no that brightness in people's eyes, and, that energy's kind of gone. I'm not a counselor. I don't have any kind of counseling degree or psychology degree or anything like that. And so for me, the biggest challenge is kind of navigating, where does my capacity begin and end? When, of course, I want to just wrap someone up in a blanket, make them a hot tea and tell them everything's going to be okay. When the reality is, we can do this work together, but your workload's still going to be. We can do this work together, but maybe your manager isn't the kindest to you. All those challenges are still going to be there. And so I think for me, that's the biggest challenge. And coming out of that is thinking about that kind of that spheres of influence and spheres of control that I think it's Covey talks about, where there's that kind of space where you can control things, you can control how you show up in the world, you can control how you speak to children, you can control the relationship you have with your colleagues. You might be able to influence up towards leadership and management roles and think about, what does the rostering look like and how many children are in each space. You might have some influence in that space, but then there's that bigger picture. We don't have control over the political space. We can do the advocacy, and that's kind of our influence in that way. But, it's not an immediate fix. So I think working in that kind of model for myself first, knowing where, taking every person as they come and understanding where I'm going to have some influence and control and where I'm definitely not, and putting my energy in the right places, and then supporting others to kind of do the same. You can't control, what room you will put in next year. Fine. That's done. What we can control is whether you're going to stay and make that decision. You've decided to stay. Now, how are we going to show up? What's going to happen when we get there? So it's a little bit, I guess, compartmentalized. But I mean, for people perhaps with a brain like mine that is neurodiverse, compartmentalizing helps us to kind of create a bit of a process, which means that we can see the light for the trees. It's not all kind of jumbled in together and we're just trying to scramble to get out. So yeah, that's probably the biggest challenge is that looking at, I guess it's the mental health aspect, right? It's the well-being, which every time I say well-being, I'm like, oh, that word has just been done to death because we're all talking about well-being, but it's so vital and we need to keep talking about it. So I have to keep using that word till I come up with a new one.
I think you do. And you know what? Sometimes I get a bit tired of us coming up with new words because then suddenly it changes the conversation. And I think, less is more. Let's just keep it simple. But I love that you're talking about, the sphere of influence and what we can control. Because I do think that we can all really easily suffer from either wanting to do everything for everybody. And I think particularly in the early years, this happens a lot because the nature of our work is to be that support and that nurturer and, that educator. Like, you're there first and foremost for children, and that's part of your role. But then that also extends to families, and it also extends to colleagues. And I think, sometimes we can either focus on the things we can't control, and that actually consumes us, or we're trying to do everything for everybody that, we do burn out literally because we actually can't do everything. So I actually like, that idea of compartmentalizing, whether it's a process or whether it's, here's what I can focus on right now. Here are the things I can control. And some of those bigger pieces, you might not have control over, and whether you let go of it or it becomes a longer term, approach to, can I change that? But maybe that's going to take a bit more time. I think that's really helpful, for us in whatever leadership role we're in, but it's also actually a really good strategy for working with other people.
The idea of slowing down and time and thinking about what time do we actually have? Because I think our sector got really fast paced. We hit
Yeah.
the pandemic and everything slowed down. And then rather than come up with a new way of working where we embraced that slowness, we actually kept going. And in some ways, I think we sped up because we were trying to make up for lost time. And I see that a lot in teams that, their QIP has 27 goals and 17 of them are high priority and all need to be completed by the end of the year. And I'm like, choose one, pick one, and let's work on that, because actually we don't have capacity to do all of it unless every single one person is taking on one goal. And then that's not a team approach, that's an individual approach. So, I think that idea of slowing down, and using, I guess, using elements of what we now know is slow pedagogy, Alison Clark's work, and thinking about that from a leadership perspective to go, actually, we can just take a breath here. Actually, we can just take a moment and think about the impacts and think about where our energy is to be able to achieve some of these goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And to do them well, I think you have to slow down to actually really dive deeply into something so it doesn't become tokenistic. And, there's 20 things we want to achieve and we're just doing it for the sake of ticking boxes. But actually, we need time to not only prevent overwhelm and burnout, but also to do things well, right? To dive deeply, to sit and learn from each other, to really observe and notice what impact those. Okay, let's talk about leadership more broadly. So you've shared lots of great strategies and some thinking. What have been some of your greatest learnings about leadership through your experience?
I've struggled with the term leadership for a really long time because I think when we go to university, when we study, when we think about leadership, we think about it very much from a top-down model. Someone's at the top, someone's making those decisions. And it's not really what leadership's all about. And, when I started learning to lead in early childhood and having that space where people could just share, what I was seeing was that leadership was coming from lots of different directions. And it was coming from the person with the Cert 3 qualification who had implemented some process to help with transitions in the morning to make them easier during lockdown. It was, it was the CEO, it was, the cook doing the work, on sustainability and kitchen gardens. And so I started, and this is only during the pandemic, so it's only like 5 or 6 years ago, started thinking about actually leadership isn't this one person at the top approach that we kind of always thought about. And so over time that's kind of grown. And so certainly part of the work that I did for a long time was thinking about the leadership capacity that every person has and harnessing that and looking at that. But I think there's been this kind of additional layer to my learning, almost, I want to say fairly recently, where I've been thinking about this individual approach that we all take and that leadership can't look the same. And I mean, if you looked through my professional learning record where I write everything down that I do, it's, here's a leadership PD, here's a leadership PD, here's leadership. And those PDs, while they're great and they teach about the theory or some strategies or whatever, it doesn't actually get to the heart of who I am. And it doesn't take into consideration that I have ADHD, I have 2 children, I, work a lot, I enjoy a beach vacation. It doesn't take me into account in that way. And so what I'm really starting to learn is that there cannot be leadership without a really strong understanding of who people are fundamentally and what are the little bits and pieces that create them and I guess build them into the person that they are when they stand in front of you. And I think for early childhood, this is quite a shift in thinking because the rhetoric for me, and I don't know if it was the same for you, Amie, but the rhetoric for me has always been leave your stuff at the door. Don't bring your issues in. Don't bring that part of yourself in. And, if you're a queer person, that's a whole nother layer of complexity. You've got to leave that part of you because who knows what the families would think. So we leave all this behind. And so when we actually come into the space, leadership almost can't exist. And then we wonder why we've got those challenges with communication and even time management, productivity, and all those sorts of things we associate with leadership. Because we're not actually bringing our authentic self to the space. We're not actually bringing all the different pieces of ourselves to the work that we do. So I think for me, that's been the biggest learning is not just going leadership can happen through every role that exists in an early childhood space, including children and families, of course. But if we're not creating space for us to be authentic, that leadership's never going to be effective. It's only ever going to be that top down.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's been my biggest learning as well about leadership. And I came into the early childhood sector thinking a leader had to have all the answers and they would just know what to do and tell everyone what to do, and I've worked under leadership models like that. And I think there is a time and place where there's some security that comes from, working with someone who seems to know what they're doing. But at the same time, I think we have, if you reflect on all of the leaders that you've worked with, it is the people who are authentic that you connect with, the people who make you feel seen and heard. And they don't have to have all the answers. And they all don't lead the same way. Like I know lots of really amazing leaders. None of them are the same. So I think that is really important. And I think it's still a significant myth that hangs around about leadership, that it's a certain type of person that can be a leader. I love what you're saying about the authenticity and, connecting with yourself and being your own leader, because I do think that is so pivotal when I think about the leaders that I know, the ones that are really great leaders, I think are connected to themselves and can step into who they are as leaders and own their own space, and lead in a way that makes sense to them. So do you have any advice then for people who might be leaders, whether they're, lacking a little bit of confidence or not sure they're doing a good enough job, or maybe they're aspiring leaders who would like to be doing something? I think some of us have that kind of urge, or we can see that things could be better and I could make some change, but maybe I'm not sure that I'm the person that can do it. Do you have any advice for people who are leading and what they can do to step into leadership, particularly when they're striving to improve opportunities for our children?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's two big pieces of advice that I tend to just come back to time and time again, and I probably will for the foreseeable future. The first one is to get a mentor. And I don't mean outlay money and go pay someone like me to come in and be your mentor. That's great. If you've got the means, awesome. You've got my contact details, 100% reach out. But someone you trust, someone who knows you, someone who gets you, someone who wants to see you succeed, and start to have those conversations, because a lot of the leadership work I've found has come through dialogue. It's come through reflection. It's come through revisiting ideas, processes, practices again and again and again. And just when you think you've got it, curveball, a new piece of research comes out. Or, the child gets 6 months older and you're like, oh, when did that happen? And we've got to think about it all over again. So having someone that you can repeatedly come back to and have a chat with, I think is a great way to refine your own leadership skills, but also grow in that confidence that you need, in that authentically, you know who you are, you know what you're about, and you've got someone that supports you wholeheartedly. The second piece of advice is to stop thinking you have to do this alone. And I think that was, for me, something that took me a long time to realize. I felt very siloed. I felt very disconnected in my work. And so, I kind of job hopped because I was looking for something and I didn't actually know what I was looking for. And I wish 20 years ago someone had said, hey, join this network. Hey, become a member of Early Childhood Australia. when we join forces, when we actually find our people and we do that work together, we actually lighten the load for everybody. And so it no longer feels like we are drowning in advocacy, or we are drowning in, parent concerns about a particular practice. Actually it's happening in 7 other centres too in your local area. But until we build that network, until we create that kind of shared collegial environment around us, we don't know. And we feel like it's just us and we feel like we're drowning. So find someone who wholeheartedly believes in you, one person, and then find a group that you can join, who maybe you're very quiet. Maybe you just go along to the meetings or to the network events and you sit there and you don't say anything to anyone, but you get the energy. You get the energy, you hear the stories, you've got something to take back with you. You don't need to be the loudest person in the room to contribute to that space. So it might, for some people that's gonna be a really strong push, to get out there and get outside your comfort zone. But that's where we grow as a sector. That's where we're going to see some significant change and some shifts in practice, but also in thinking and the way things are done, because it doesn't have to be the same forever.
Yeah, such good advice. I love that. And I love that you mentioned not to just get any mentor, but to get someone who knows you. And, absolutely, there are amazing mentors like you, which are really, really helpful for people who have the means. But I love the idea of actually finding a mentor who knows you and sees you for who you are, because I think too, certainly my experience and some of the leaders I work with, you do sometimes hear messages from people around you who are in your workplace or even beyond, who might give you some feedback that you perhaps don't like. And it's not always feedback that you should actually take on board. So I do think, there's something to be said about really focusing on who am I listening to and why am I listening to their perspective as well. Someone who sees who you are and can actually see your intention as well is going to, I think, give you more constructive support and feedback around not only where you might grow and help you build your skill set, but also recognize your strengths. And I think that's really important, as opposed to the critics. And there's plenty of critics out there who won't necessarily
critic.
Right? Yeah, absolutely. And I do also love the idea of community, because I do think leadership's hard and it can feel really lonely, whether there's other leaders in your service or school, or whether you are really feeling like you're going at it alone. But having people around you who are doing similar work, to not only learn from, but also to lean on, like we are in this together, and it's really easy to forget. I love that that saying by Ram Dass that we're all just walking each other home. It's really beautiful to remember. And I get inspired, connecting with people like you in the sector who are also doing similar work. It keeps me energized and helps me feel that I'm not alone doing the work that I do. So I think there's real power in coming together, building those networks and finding your people, like you said, your tribe too, people who are like-minded and want the best for you and see the best in you. I think we all thrive in those conditions.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's been so good to talk to you, Sarah Louise. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your experience and your story with us. Before we go, where's the best place to find you and reach out to you if people want to know more about your work?
Yeah, so I predominantly share on Facebook, so Sarah Louise Consultancy, if you look that up on Facebook, but also connect with me on LinkedIn. Everything that I share on LinkedIn, everything's free, everything's accessible. It might be a little prompt, it might be, an idea that you take and roll with at your service. So I'd love to connect with you and keep talking.
Amazing. Thank you again. It was such a joy to talk to you. I always learn so much from you. So thank you again for your time.